Marcus Chen clutched his meal tray tighter as he scanned the bustling Kepler University cafeteria. The familiar knot in his stomach twisted as dozens of Novarian students glanced his way, their iridescent blue skin catching the artificial sunlight, streaming through the dome's transparent ceiling. Some whispered behind their hands. Others simply turned away when they noticed him approaching their tables. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly to a group of students at a half-empty table, his Earth accent thick and unmistakable. "Mind if I sit here?" The students, their elongated limbs graceful in ways humans could never achieve, exchanged glances. One of them, a tall male with silver markings along his temples, wrinkled his nose in apparent distaste. "Sorry, we're expecting friends," the student replied in perfect standard galactic, though Marcus could see 3 empty chairs that would remain vacant for the entire meal. Marcus nodded, forcing a smile. "No problem." The scene had repeated itself daily for the past 3 weeks since his arrival on Novaris. As part of the interstellar exchange program, as the only human student at Kepler University, Marcus had expected some adjustment period, but the constant rejection based solely on his accent, the way his tongue struggled with certain galactic consonants, how his vowels carried the distinctive Earth inflection had worn him down. More than he'd anticipated, he found his usual spot, at a small table in the far corner of the cafeteria, positioned so he could watch the other students without being directly in their line of sight. As he unpacked his luncha sad approximation of Earth cuisine made from local ingredients, Marcus reflected on how different this experience was from what he'd imagined. The Novarians were an advanced species, their society built on principles of harmony and intellectual pursuit. Their planet was renowned throughout the galaxy for its universities and research facilities. When Marcus had been selected for the exchange program, his professors on Earth had told him it was the opportunity of a lifetime. What they hadn't prepared him for was the subtle but pervasive discrimination he'd face. It wasn't malicious, exactly. The Novarians didn't actively hate humans. They simply found Marcus's accent distasteful. His speech patterns marked him as primitive, his pronunciation errors as evidence of an inferior linguistic evolution. In a society that prized eloquence and precise communication above almost everything else, Marcus's Earth accent made him a social pariah. The gravitational constants in Sector 7 require recalibration. Marcus heard a group of physics students discussing at a nearby table. He understood every word. His galactic was actually quite good despite his accent, but when he'd tried to contribute to similar conversations in class, his input was often dismissed or met with barely concealed irritation. As Marcus ate in solitude, he noticed her for the first time, a Novarian female sitting 2 tables away, her skin a deeper shade of blue than most of her peers, with distinctive golden freckles scattered across her high cheekbones. Unlike the others, she wasn't surrounded by a chattering group of friends. She ate alone, reading from a digital tablet while absently picking at her meal. Their eyes met briefly across the cafeteria, and Marcus was struck by the intelligence and kindness he glimpsed in her amber gaze. She offered him a small smile before returning to her reading, and Marcus felt his heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with the planet's slightly higher gravity. Over the following days, Marcus found himself looking for the blue-skinned girl. He learned her schedule, noting that she always sat alone, always reading, always maintaining a polite distance from her fellow students. She seemed as much an outsider as he was, though for reasons he couldn't fathom. On a particularly difficult Thursday, after a linguistics professor had publicly corrected Marcus's pronunciation in front of the entire class, causing several students to snicker, Marcus sat at his corner table feeling more isolated than ever. He was considering abandoning his meal entirely when a gentle voice spoke beside him. "Your accent," the voice said in softly accented galactic. "It's from Earth's northern hemisphere, isn't it? Specifically the old American continent." Marcus looked up, startled, to find the blue-skinned girl standing beside his table, her own meal tray balanced in her graceful hands. Up close, he could see that her golden freckles formed intricate patterns across her skin, and her amber eyes held genuine curiosity rather than the disdain he'd grown accustomed to. Yes, Marcus managed, his surprise making his accent even thicker. "How did you know?" "I've studied Earth languages as a hobby," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "May I?" Marcus nodded, too shocked to speak as she settled into the chair. No Novarian student had voluntarily sat with him since his arrival. "I'm Zara Volkov," she said, extending her hand in the human custom rather than the traditional Novarian greeting. "And I think your accent is beautiful." "Beautiful?" Marcus repeated, certain he'd misunderstood. Zara nodded, taking a delicate bite of her meal. "It carries the history of your world in every syllable. The way you pronounce harmony reminds me of ancient Earth poets I've studied. There's music in it that our precise galactic lacks." For the first time in weeks, Marcus felt his shoulders relax. "Most people here seem to think it sounds primitive. Most people here," Zara said with a slight edge to her voice, "have never bothered to appreciate linguistic diversity. They mistake different for deficient." As they talked, Marcus learned that Zara was studying xenolinguistics with a specialty in cultural anthropology. Her thesis focused on the way language shaped thought patterns across different species. She was fascinated by the subtle variations in how different cultures approach communication. "Your Earth accent doesn't just sound different," she explained, her amber eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "It represents an entirely different evolutionary path for human communication. The way your tongue shapes certain sounds, the rhythm of your speech, it's adapted to Earth's specific atmospheric density and gravity. It's not inferior, it's specialized." Marcus found himself smiling genuinely for the first time since arriving on Novaris. "You really see it that way." "I see it the way it is," Zara replied firmly. "Unfortunately, many of my peers lack the education to appreciate such nuances." As their conversation continued, Marcus noticed other students beginning to stare. Whispers started at nearby tables, and several Novarians turned in their seats to get a better look at the unusual pairing. Zara seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps she simply didn't care. "Why are you sitting with me?" Marcus asked quietly, genuinely curious. "I mean, I'm grateful. But won't this hurt your social standing?" Zara paused, considering her words carefully. "Because," she said finally, "I know what it's like to eat alone." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the lunch period bell chimed, signaling the end of their meal. As students began clearing their tables and heading to afternoon classes, Zara stood and gathered her belongings. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the galaxy. "You'd want to do this again," Zara smiled, and Marcus noticed how the expression transformed her entire face, making her golden freckles seem to shimmer. "Marcus Chen from Earth's northern continent," she said. "I think this might be the beginning of a very interesting friendship." As she walked away, leaving Marcus sitting alone again, but no longer feeling lonely, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just begun. Round him, other students continued to whisper and stare, but for once, Marcus didn't care about their judgment. Tomorrow, he wouldn't have to eat alone. The next day, Marcus arrived at the cafeteria earlier than usual, his heart racing with an emotion he couldn't quite name. As he selected his meal, he found himself wondering if Zara had meant what she said about meeting again, or if it had been a momentary kindness she might regret. His doubts evaporated when he spotted her already seated at what had become his table in the corner, two steaming cups of Novarian tea waiting on the surface. She looked up as he approached, her amber eyes bright with welcome. "I took the liberty of ordering for both of us," Zara said, gesturing to the tea. "I thought you might enjoy trying Calath root brew. It's supposed to enhance cognitive function." "Thank you," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. The simple gesture touched him more than he cared to admit. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come back." "Why wouldn't I?" Zara asked, genuinely puzzled. Marcus gestured subtly toward the other tables, where clusters of Novarian students sat in their usual groups. Several were openly watching them now, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. "Because of what people are saying." Zara followed his gaze, her expression hardening slightly. "What exactly are they saying?" "That you're associating with inferior company," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. "I heard some students talking after class yesterday. They think you're either conducting some kind of anthropological experiment or He trailed off, not wanting to voice the more hurtful speculation. Or what? Zara pressed, her voice carrying an edge that made her seem suddenly dangerous despite her slight frame. Or that there's something wrong with you too, Marcus finished. Quietly. Zara was silent for a long moment, stirring her tea with deliberate precision. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully controlled. They're not entirely wrong about there being something wrong with me. Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean? I'm what Novarians call a genetic deviant, Zara said matter-of-factly, though Marcus caught the slight tremor in her voice. My neural pathways don't process information the same way as typical Novarians. I think differently, learn differently, see patterns where others see chaos. She paused, meeting his eyes directly. Most of my peers find my thought processes uncomfortable. They prefer the predictable harmony of like minds thinking in unison. I disrupt that harmony simply by existing. Marcus felt a surge of anger on her behalf. That's ridiculous. You're brilliant. I can tell just from talking to you. Brilliant, perhaps, but different, Zara said with a sad smile. And different makes people uncomfortable. So yes, I know what it's like to eat alone, Marcus Chen. I've been doing it for most of my academic life. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Professor Hendricks, the only other human at Kepler University. The middle-aged linguistics professor approached their table with a concerned expression, his own Earth accent immediately apparent as he spoke. Marcus, might I have a word? Professor Hendricks asked, glancing meaningfully at Zara. Of course. Professor, this is Zara Volkov. She's studying xenolinguistics, Zara. Professor Hendricks teaches comparative syntax. Zara rose gracefully, extending her hand in the human fashion. An honor, Professor. I've read your papers on morphological adaptation and cross-species communication. Professor Hendricks shook her hand, his expression warming slightly. Impressive work yourself. Miss Volkov, your thesis proposal on cognitive linguistic interfaces was quite thought-provoking. As they spoke, Marcus realized that Professor Hendricks was evaluating Zara, trying to determine whether she was trustworthy. The older man's protective instincts toward his fellow human were obvious. Though Marcus appreciated the concern, Professor, Marcus said carefully, is there something specific you wanted to discuss? Professor Hendricks sat down, lowering his voice. I've been hearing talk, Marcus. Some of the faculty are concerned about your social associations. Concerned how? Zara asked, her tone sharper than before. There's been discussion about whether Marcus's integration into Novarian academic culture is proceeding appropriately. Professor Hendricks explained diplomatically. Some believe that forming attachments outside his designated peer group might be counterproductive. Designated peer group, Marcus repeated, confused. The other exchange students from various worlds, Professor Hendricks clarified. The administration feels it would be more beneficial for you to socialize with other off-worlders, rather than attempting to integrate directly with Novarian students. Zara's expression had grown cold. And what's the administration's position on Novarian students who choose to associate with off-worlders? Professor Hendricks looked uncomfortable. Miss Volkov, I'm not privy to internal Novarian academic policies regarding their own students. But you can guess, Zara pressed. The professor sighed. My advice to both of you would be to exercise discretion. Academic institutions, regardless of species, tend to be conservative about social disruption. After Professor Hendricks left, Marcus and Zara sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Marcus spoke. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should stick to the other exchange students. Is that what you want? Zara asked quietly. Marcus looked at her. The way she held herself with quiet dignity despite the whispers around them. The intelligence that sparked in her amber eyes. The kindness she'd shown him when no one else would. He thought about the past 2 days, how much brighter his world had become simply because someone had chosen to sit with him. No, he said firmly. It's not what I want at all. Zara smiled, the expression transforming her face. Good. Because I have a proposal. What kind of proposal? There's a xenolinguistics symposium this weekend. Students from across the sector presenting research on cross-cultural communication. I was planning to attend alone, but she paused, looking almost shy. Would you like to come with me, as my research partner? Marcus felt his heart leap. You want me to be your research partner? Your perspective as a native Earth dialect speaker would be invaluable, Zara said seriously. And besides, I think it's time people saw us together outside the cafeteria. Let them make of it what they will, as they made plans for the symposium. Neither noticed Dean Thalorum observing them from across the cafeteria, the tall Novarian. Administrator's expression thoughtful and somewhat troubled. The dean had been receiving increasingly frequent complaints about the inappropriate association between the human exchange student and one of their most academically gifted, but socially problematic students. Change was coming to Kepler University, whether they were ready for it or not. That evening, as Marcus worked in his small apartment, he received a message on his personal communicator. The caller ID showed only a string of numbers, but when he accepted the call, Dean Thalorum's imposing figure appeared in the holographic display. Mr. Chen, the dean said without preamble, I trust you're finding your studies at Kepler University enriching. Yes, sir. Very much so. Excellent. I wonder if you might have time to meet with me tomorrow morning. There are some aspects of your academic program I'd like to discuss. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Of course. Dean Thalorum, is there a problem? Nothing that can't be resolved with proper guidance, the dean replied smoothly. Shall we say 900 hours in my office? After the call ended, Marcus stared at the blank screen, a growing sense of unease settling in his stomach. He had a feeling that tomorrow's meeting would determine not just his academic future at Kepler University, but something far more important, his ability to continue the friendship that had begun to mean everything to him. Outside his window, Novaris's twin moons rose over the university campus, their pale light casting long shadows across the quadrangle, where he and Zara had planned to walk after the symposium. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Marcus was determined not to let fear drive him back into isolation. Some things, he was beginning to realize, were worth fighting for. The morning meeting with Dean Thalorum had gone exactly as Marcus feared. Seated in the imposing office with its crystalline walls and floating holographic displays, Marcus had listened as the dean strongly suggested he limit his social interactions to approved study groups and exchange student activities. The Novarian academic environment requires careful balance, Dean Thalorum had explained, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that indicated authority among his species. Disruption of established social patterns can be detrimental to the learning atmosphere. Marcus had nodded politely while inwardly seething. The message was clear: stay away from Zara Volkov or face academic consequences. Now, 3 days later, Marcus sat in the university's grand library, trying to focus on his quantum linguistics assignment. The vast circular chamber stretched up 7 stories, its transparent walls offering a panoramic view of Novaris's capital city. Normally, the sight would inspire him, but today he felt trapped. He hadn't seen Zara since their conversation about the symposium. She'd sent him brief messages explaining that she was dealing with administrative issues of her own, but her communications had grown increasingly distant. Marcus suspected she was facing pressure similar to his own. Excuse me, you're the human exchange student, right? Marcus looked up to find a young Novarian male standing beside his study carrel. Unlike most students, this one carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to attention. His skin was a pale blue-silver, and his clothing bore the subtle status markers that indicated wealth and social position. I'm Marcus Chen, yes. Jackson Rivers, the student introduced himself, extending his hand in an approximation of human greeting. I run the campus social media network. Mind if I sit? Marcus gestured to an empty chair. Curious despite his wariness, Jackson settled down and immediately activated a small recording device. I'm doing a series on cultural integration, Jackson explained, the challenges faced by off-world students, how they adapt to Novarian society. Would you be willing to share your experiences? Before Marcus could respond, a commotion erupted from the library's main floor below. Raised voices carried up through the open atrium, and Marcus could see students gathering around something happening near the circulation desk. What's going on down there? Marcus asked, standing to get a better view. Jackson was already moving, his recording device still active. Let's find out. They descended to the main floor, where a crowd had formed around Zara. She stood near a display of rare texts, facing three upperclassmen who had clearly cornered her. Marcus could hear fragments of their conversation as he pushed through the gathering students. Inappropriate associations reflecting poorly on the university. Genetic deviation making you susceptible to inferior influences. Should know your place in the academic hierarchy. Zara stood perfectly still, her amber eyes blazing with controlled fury. When she spoke, her voice carried clearly across the library's acoustically perfect space. My place in the academic hierarchy, she said, each word precisely enunciated, is determined by my intellectual contributions, not by your prejudices about genetic diversity or species association. One of the confronting students, a tall female with elaborate cranial ridges marking her as nobility, stepped closer to Zara. Your recent behavior suggests otherwise. Associating with primitives, disrupting social order, primitives. Zara's voice rose slightly, though she maintained her composure. You mean Marcus Chen, who scored higher than any Novarian student on last week's comparative syntax examination. The same Marcus whose accent you mock despite the fact that he's mastered for galactic languages. While most of you struggle with basic standard, Marcus felt his heart racing as he realized Zara was defending him publicly, potentially destroying her own academic standing in the process. His test scores are irrelevant. Another student interjected, his linguistic contamination stop. Zara's single word carried such authority that the entire library fell silent. Listen to yourselves. Linguistic contamination, genetic deviation, primitive associations. Do you hear the echo of historical atrocities in your words? She stepped forward, and the noble-born student actually backed away. Marcus Chen's accent isn't contamination, it's evolution. It's the sound of a species that developed language in an entirely different environment, shaped by different atmospheric pressures, different social structures, different survival needs. To call it primitive is to call diversity itself primitive. The library had grown completely quiet now, with even the administrative staff stopping their work to listen. And my genetic variation, Zara continued, her voice carrying to the upper levels. It allows me to process linguistic patterns in ways your pure genetics cannot. I see connections you miss, understand nuances you ignore. My difference isn't a defect, it's an advantage. Marcus realized that Jackson was still recording, his device capturing every word of Zara's impassioned defense. Round them, other students had begun recording as well, their personal communicators active. You want to know what's really primitive? Zara asked, her gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. The idea that conformity equals superiority, the belief that different means deficient, the assumption that one way of being, thinking, or speaking is inherently better than another. She paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since he'd arrived. Marcus Chen has shown me more intellectual curiosity, genuine kindness, and open-minded thinking in 2 weeks than I've encountered in 4 years at this university. If that makes me contaminated by his influence, then I consider myself fortunate to be so contaminated. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus felt tears threatening as he realized what Zara had just sacrificed for him: her academic reputation, her social standing, possibly her entire future at Kepler University. Before he could think better of it, Marcus stepped forward, emerging from the crowd. His movement created a ripple of whispers, but he kept his eyes fixed on Zara. Thank you, he said simply, his Earth accent thick with emotion. But you don't have to fight my battles for me. I'm not fighting your battles, Zara replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'm fighting ours. The crowd began to disperse as library security arrived, but the damage, or perhaps the breakthrough, had already occurred. As students filed out, many were already uploading their recordings to various social networks. Jackson Rivers approached them, his recording device still active. That was incredible. He said to Zara, "Mind if I ask you a few follow-up questions?" Within hours, Zara's speech had spread across the university's social networks. By evening, it had reached the planetary communication grid. By the next morning, clips of her defense were being shared across multiple star systems. The headline that accompanied most shares read, "Novarian student's passionate defense of diversity goes viral. Different doesn't mean deficient." Marcus woke to find hundreds of messages on his personal communicator, some supportive, others hostile, all intense. The attention was overwhelming, but what struck him most was a message from Zara, sent late the previous night. "Thank you for giving me something worth defending. Whatever happens next, I don't regret a single word." As Marcus prepared for what he knew would be a very different day at Kepler University, he realized that their simple friendship had become something much larger, a symbol of resistance against prejudice, a catalyst for conversations that needed to happen. The viral moment had changed everything. Now they would have to deal with the consequences together. The summons came at dawn. Marcus barely had time to dress before university security escorted him to an emergency meeting. In the administration building, the normally serene campus buzzed with activity as news crews from multiple star systems set up equipment outside the main gates. In the sterile conference room, Marcus found himself facing a tribunal of officials: Dean Thalorum, Counselor Vex from the Novarian planetary government, and Rita Santos, a human diplomat he'd never seen before, but whose presence clearly indicated that Earth's government was now involved. Mr. Chen, Counselor Vex began, her silver-marked temples indicating her high rank in Novarian society. "Your association with Miss Volkov has created a significant diplomatic incident. We've received formal complaints from 17 academic institutions across the sector." Rita Santos leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. "Marcus, I'm here representing Earth's interests. The exchange program that brought you here is now in jeopardy. The Novarian government is considering expelling all human students." "Because I made a friend?" Marcus asked, unable to keep the incredulity out of his voice. "Because," Dean Thalorum interjected, "your friendship has inspired unrest across multiple worlds. We've received reports of demonstrations, academic protests, and social disruption on 12 planets." Counselor Vex activated a holographic display showing news feeds from across the galaxy. Marcus watched in amazement as students from dozens of species gathered in support of what they were calling the Kepler Declaration, Zara's impromptu speech about diversity and acceptance. "The situation has escalated beyond our control," Counselor Vex continued. "Traditional Novarian values are being questioned. Our social order is under threat." "Maybe it should be," Marcus said quietly. The room fell silent. Rita Santos looked alarmed, while the Novarian officials exchanged glances that clearly indicated Marcus had just made things worse. "Mr. Chen," Dean Thalorum said carefully, "you have two options. Accept immediate transfer to a human-majority institution in the Outer Rim, or face academic expulsion and deportation." "What about Zara?" "Miss Volkov's situation is being handled separately," Counselor Vex replied coldly. Before Marcus could respond, the conference room doors slid open. Zara walked in, flanked by 2 security officers, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious stress etched on her features. "I demanded to be present for any discussion of my academic status," she announced. "Miss Volkov," Dean Thalorum began, "this meeting concerns Mr. Chen's." "This meeting concerns both of us," Zara interrupted. "Since our association is apparently the issue." She took an empty seat beside Marcus, and he felt a surge of strength from her presence. Their hands found each other under the table, fingers intertwining. "Zara," Marcus whispered, "you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," she whispered back. Counselor Vex studied them with calculating eyes. "Miss Volkov, you have been offered placement in a prestigious research position on the outer colonies, far from the current disruption. It would be wise to accept, and if I refuse, then you face the same consequences as Mr. Chen." Rita Santos cleared her throat. "If I may, there's another consideration. Both of you have become symbols of interspecies cooperation. Your separation might actually inflame tensions rather than calm them." Marcus felt Zara's hand tighten in his. Over the past weeks, their friendship had evolved into something deeper, a connection that transcended species boundaries and challenged everything he thought he knew about love and compatibility. "Counselor Vex," Zara said formally, "I request permission to speak freely about my intentions." "Granted." Zara stood, pulling Marcus up with her. Marcus Chen is not just my friend or my research partner. He's the person I want to spend my life with. Our relationship has moved beyond academic association. Marcus felt his heart skip. They had discussed their growing feelings privately, but hearing Zara declare them publicly made everything real in a way that both thrilled and terrified him. Miss Volkov, Dean Thalorum said carefully, "Are you declaring a romantic attachment to a human?" "I'm declaring love," Zara replied simply, "for a remarkable person who happens to be human." The room erupted in urgent whispered conversations between the officials. Marcus realized they were facing not just academic consequences now, but political ones. Interspecies romantic relationships weren't forbidden, but they were rare enough to cause significant social disruption. Counselor Vex raised her hand for silence. "This complicates matters considerably. Romantic unions between species require extensive legal documentation, medical evaluation, and social compatibility assessments. We're prepared for whatever requirements you set," Marcus said, standing beside Zara. "You don't understand," Rita Santos interjected. "If you proceed with this relationship, you'll become permanent symbols of interspecies cooperation. Every decision you make, every public appearance, every statement will be scrutinized by governments across the galaxy." "Are you threatening U.S.?" Zara asked. "We're warning you," Counselor Vex replied. "There are extremist groups on multiple worlds who see your relationship as a threat to species purity. Your safety cannot be guaranteed." Marcus felt a chill as the full implications hit him. Their love story had become a political flashpoint, putting them both in physical danger. However, Counselor Vex continued, "There may be a way to resolve this situation beneficially for all parties." She activated another holographic display, showing architectural plans for what appeared to be a large campus facility. "The Galactic Council has been discussing the establishment of an interspecies cultural institute," she explained, "a research and educational facility dedicated to promoting understanding between different species. They need directors, preferably individuals with demonstrated commitment to cross-cultural cooperation." Marcus stared at the plans. "You're offering us a job. We're offering you a purpose," Rita Santos said. "A way to channel the attention you've attracted into something constructive." "Where would this institute be located?" Zara asked. "Neutral space," Counselor Vex replied. "Between sectors, under joint governance by multiple species. You would have independence to pursue your research and relationship without the political pressures of any single world." Marcus looked at Zara, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her amber eyes. It was an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving everything they'd known behind. "We need time to discuss this," Zara said. "I'm afraid time is a luxury we don't have," Dean Thalorum replied. "The media attention is intensifying. A decision must be made within the next 24 hours." As the meeting ended and they were escorted back to their respective quarters, Marcus and Zara managed a few moments alone in the corridor. "An institute of our own," Marcus said wonderingly. "We could actually make a difference. We could also be walking into a beautiful prison," Zara replied pragmatically. "Cut off from our home worlds, dependent on the goodwill of governments that see us as useful symbols." Marcus cupped her face in his hands, marveling at the cool softness of her blue skin. "Whatever we decide together." "Together," Zara agreed, rising on her toes to kiss him. The kiss was witnessed by a journalist who had somehow gained access to the building, and the image would be transmitted across the galaxy within the hour, a human and a Novarian embracing, in defiance of the forces trying to separate them. The caption would read, "Love conquers all, even species barriers." But as they would soon discover, love, while powerful, would need allies to survive the storm that was coming. 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Interspecies Cultural Institute, watching the Kepler system's twin stars rise over the artificial world that had become their home. The institute floated in neutral space, a gleaming structure that represented the first truly integrated interspecies educational facility in galactic history. "Second thoughts," Zara's voice came from behind him, carrying the warmth that never failed to make his heart skip. Marcus turned to see his wife they had married in a ceremony broadcast across 12 systems approaching with 2 cups of their morning ritual, earth coffee blended with Novarian spices. She wore the simple white robes that marked her as co-director of the Institute, her silver hair now grown long and adorned with traditional Novarian braids interwoven with earth flowers. "Never," Marcus replied, accepting his cup and pulling her close. "Though I sometimes wonder what we've gotten ourselves into." Through the transparent walls of their quarters, they could see the Institute's central quad, where students from 47 different species gathered for morning classes. The sight still amazed Marcus, beings who had never interacted before working together, learning from each other, building friendships that transcended evolutionary barriers. The morning briefing shows enrollment applications from 6 new species, Zara reported, settling into his arms, including the first applications from the Crystallian Empire. "The Crystallines, I thought they'd sworn never to interact with organic species. Apparently, our work on nonverbal communication theory intrigued their science council," Zara said with satisfaction. "Professor Hendricks says it's the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in centuries." Marcus smiled, thinking of their former linguistics professor who had joined the Institute as head of the Communication Sciences Department. Many of their Kepler University colleagues had followed them, drawn by the opportunity to work in true interspecies collaboration. "Speaking of breakthroughs," Marcus said, "I received a message from Earth this morning. The Terrestrial Council wants to establish permanent exchange programs with 17 species, based on our integration models, and Novaris, Dean Thalorum sends his regards." Marcus chuckled. "Apparently, the social reforms that followed our departure have made Kepler University the most sought-after institution in the sector. Applications from off-world students have increased by 400%. They stood in comfortable silence, watching their students begin their day. Among them, Marcus spotted familiar faces: Jackson Rivers, whose documentary about their story had won the Galactic Communications Prize; Rita Santos, who had left diplomacy to teach interspecies law; even some of the students who had initially opposed them at Kepler, now working as research assistants in cross-cultural studies. "The wedding preparations are proceeding well," Zara mentioned, referring to the ceremony they were planning for another interspecies couple, a human engineer and a Centaurian artist who had met at the Institute. "It will be our 15th interspecies wedding this year. I love that we're not unique anymore," Marcus said softly. "We were never unique," Zara corrected. "We were just first." A gentle chime indicated the start of the morning assembly, where students and faculty gathered daily to discuss ongoing projects and cultural exchange initiatives. As co-directors, Marcus and Zara were expected to attend, but they lingered for a moment longer on the observation deck. "Do you ever miss it?" Marcus asked. "The simplicity of just being students, worrying about grades and assignments instead of interstellar politics." Zara considered this seriously. "Sometimes, but then I think about the alternative: me eating alone in that cafeteria, you isolated at your corner table, both of us believing we were too different to belong anywhere." She turned in his arms, her amber eyes bright with the intelligence and kindness that had first captured his heart. "We built something better than belonging, Marcus. We built a place where everyone belongs, even when they eat outside, especially when they eat outside." Zara laughed, referencing the Institute's tradition of outdoor dining in the central courtyard, regardless of species or dietary requirements. As they walked toward the assembly hall, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, sitting beside someone who was forced to eat alone, had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined. The assembly hall was filled with the cheerful chaos of multiple species communicating in dozens of languages. Marcus took his place at the podium, looking out over faces that represented the future of interspecies cooperation. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his Earth accent now a celebrated feature rather than a source of shame. "Today marks the 6-month anniversary of the Interspecies Cultural Institute, but more importantly, it marks 6 months of proving that our differences make us stronger, not weaker." Applause filled the hall, a cacophony of sounds as different species expressed approval in their traditional ways. I want to share a message we received this morning, Marcus continued, from the Galactic Council of Education. Due to the success of our integration programs, they're funding 50 similar institutes throughout the galaxy. Our model of respect, acceptance, and collaborative learning is being adopted across 12 sectors. The applause grew thunderous. Zara joined him at the podium, her presence still giving him strength after all these months. But, Zara added when the noise subsided, our real success isn't measured in numbers or political achievements. It's measured in the friendships formed between beings who were taught they could never understand each other. It's measured in the couples who found love across species barriers. It's measured in the children who will grow up believing that diversity is normal, beautiful, and necessary. She paused, looking directly at Marcus with a love that needed no translation. It's measured in the simple truth that no one should ever have to eat alone unless they choose to. As the assembly dissolved into smaller groups discussing their daily projects, Marcus and Zara found themselves surrounded by students and faculty, wanting to share their own stories of acceptance, friendship, and love found in unexpected places. Later, that evening, as they walked through the Institute's garden where earth roses grew beside Novarian luminescent vines, Marcus realized that their story had become something larger than themselves. It had become proof that the universe was vast enough for all its inhabitants to find their place, their purpose, and their people. "What are you thinking about?" Zara asked, noticing his contemplative mood. "About how grateful I am that you chose to sit with the weird human in the corner of the cafeteria," Marcus replied. "I chose to sit with someone who looked as lonely as I felt," Zara corrected. "Everything else was just destiny." Above them, stars from 100 different systems twinkled in the artificial sky, each one representing worlds where their story was being told, where other lonely souls might find the courage to reach across the void of difference and discover a connection. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of evening study groups, multiple species working together on projects that would have been impossible just months ago. The Institute hummed with life, purpose, and the kind of harmony that came not from sameness, but from celebrating difference. As they returned to their quarters, Marcus's communicator chimed with a message from a young human student on a distant world. "I saw your story, and today I sat with the alien girl who always eats alone. Thank you for showing me that being different isn't being wrong." Marcus showed the message to Zara, who smiled with the satisfaction of knowing their legacy was spreading far beyond anything they could have imagined. "Another life changed," she said softly. "Another person who won't have to eat alone," Marcus agreed. They stood together on their balcony, looking out at the cosmos that had once seemed too vast to cross, now bridged by understanding, acceptance, and love. Their journey from that first shared meal to this moment had proven that the smallest acts of kindness could reshape the galaxy. In the end, they had learned that love truly was universal. It just needed someone brave enough to take the first step across the void and say, "Mind if I sit here?" The universe, it turned out, had been waiting for that question all along.